Nonprofit organizations are increasingly realizing that they can't solely rely on charitable donations to keep their nonprofit running. There's too many organizations competing for too few charitable dollars, and unfortunately, those dollars often dry up during economic recessions. And so, a lot of nonprofits are coming in and asking us about creating social enterprises, right? How can the nonprofit run a business that'll create some sustainable funding? And oftentimes, people have heard, well, I heard that the IRS doesn't like that, or I heard that that'll get me into trouble, or I'll lose my nonprofit's tax exempt status. And it's a really complicated area of law. There are certainly some legal and tax challenges that we need to work through when a nonprofit wants to set up a social enterprise, but you should not automatically assume that they're somehow wrong or illegal or bad. The issue is that when you're a typical 501c3 nonprofit, you are required to operate exclusively for your charitable, religious, educational, scientific, or other tax exempt purpose. And the key word there is exclusively, right? So that begs the question, should you be running a business when you told the IRS that you were exclusively operating for some charitable purpose? So to avoid this and some other complex tax and liability issues, it's not unusual for a nonprofit that wants to create a social enterprise to actually create a subsidiary corporation that runs the social enterprise activity, so that the liabilities associated with that social enterprise don't threaten the assets of the nonprofit organization, and helps us work through some of the other tax and legal issues such as this: are we operating exclusively for our charitable purpose? Now, we're painting this with broad brushstrokes. Obviously, there's a lot that you should discuss with your attorney before setting up an entity like this. And like any business venture, the question has to be asked, in this case by the board of directors, what happens if the social enterprise fails? Will our nonprofit be accused of using funds inappropriately, especially if those funds could have better supported our charitable purpose? Could the failure of the social enterprise have some other impact on the main nonprofit organization's financial viability, especially if the nonprofit uses its own funds to start that social enterprise? And even separate from all of that, does the social enterprise itself pose some risks that could subject either the enterprise or the nonprofit to potential litigation? Consulting services are incredibly popular right now for social enterprises, and there's always the risk of a disgruntled customer or client in that vein. So there are a lot of things that need to be considered, but yes, a nonprofit organization can set up and run a social enterprise. It just needs to be very carefully structured.